The last transmission from Halcyon Colony arrived on a Tuesday. It came in fragmented, punched through with static, the voice of a woman named Etta Calloway who had been the colony's agricultural coordinator. She wasn't screaming. That was the part that stayed with people. She spoke clearly, methodically, as though reading soil pH reports, and she said, "They came from the dark side of the fourth moon." There was no warning. The orbital defense grid fired for 11 seconds before it was gone. The eastern districts are burning. The western districts are gone. If anyone is receiving this, know that we did not provoke this. We did nothing. We were growing wheat. Then static, then silence, then nothing at all. 22 light hours later, the deep space relay at Vanguard Station bounced her words to Earth. They arrived during a shift change at United Earth Strategic Command, and the duty officer, a young lieutenant named Osai, played the message twice before he understood what he was hearing. The first time he thought it was a drill. They ran drills every quarter, and the simulations were realistic enough to make you forget they weren't real. But drills came with header codes, authentication stamps, routing tags. This had none of those. This was raw, unformatted, a voice on the edge of the void talking to anyone who would listen. He played it a third time to make sure his hands would stop shaking before he picked up the phone. The call chain took 40 minutes. Watch Commander to Sector Commander. Sector Commander to Fleet Operations. Fleet Operations to the Joint Chief's Night Desk. Night Desk to Admiral Marin Vasic, who was in her quarters aboard the UESC Carthage, orbiting Luna, eating rehydrated oatmeal and reading a letter from her daughter. Her daughter's name was Pell. Pell was 17. Pell lived on Halcyon Colony, where she attended a secondary school built from local timber and transparent aluminum, and she had written to her mother about a boy she liked, a tall, quiet kid named Soren who worked in the greenhouse after school and had once brought her a flower he'd cultivated himself, a hybrid of earth lavender and a local plant that smelled like rain on hot stone. Pell wrote about the way the sky turned copper at sunset because of the mineral content in the upper atmosphere. She wrote about a teacher who made them read pre-collapse poetry and how she'd found herself crying at a Szymborska poem without understanding why. She wrote about being happy. Vasic read the letter. Then she read the transmission transcript. Then she set the oatmeal aside, very carefully, as though it mattered that the spoon not rattle against the bowl, and walked to the bridge in her slippers because there was no time to find her boots. The Vithrai. Humanity had known about them for 11 years. First contact had been electromagnetic, a burst of structured signals intercepted by the Arecibo II array during a routine deep-field survey. The signals were dense, layered, mathematically precise in a way that ruled out natural origin within seconds of initial analysis. A team of linguists and mathematicians spent 18 months decoding them. They aged visibly during the process. One of them, a woman named Dr. Inara Ghosh, later described the experience as trying to learn a language that was designed by someone who thought in frequencies instead of words. The signals were not greetings. They were boundary markers, territorial claims, a cartography of ownership broadcast into the void like a fence made of math. Here is ours. There is ours. That too is ours. The message was clear even before the translation was complete. The Vithrai considered a significant volume of space to be their sovereign territory, and they were telling the universe to stay out. Humans had sent a response. Not aggressive, not submissive, curious, a greeting, a declaration of peaceful intent, a cultural exchange package containing music, art, mathematics, the genome of a common daisy, and a message that said, in 14 languages and one mathematical proof, "We are here. We mean you no harm. We would like to talk." The Vithrai had not responded. Humanity sent another message, and another. Over 11 years, 47 separate transmissions, each more elaborate than the last, each containing new offerings, symphonies, engineering schematics, children's drawings, the sound of laughter recorded in a dozen cities. Everyone was met with silence. Then Halcyon. The colony had been home to 2.3 million people, families, children, engineers and farmers and teachers and drunks and poets, and people who argued about football scores from a planet they'd never see again. They had built greenhouses and breweries and a theater that seated 400 where a local company performed Shakespeare with alien sunlight streaming through hand-blown glass windows. They had planted forests of earth oaks genetically modified for the local soil, and the oaks had taken to the ground like they'd been waiting for it, growing twice as fast as they would have on the homeworld. They had named constellations from their new sky, the hammer, the cradle, the old dog. They had buried their dead in a hillside cemetery overlooking a valley where the grain fields stretched to the horizon, gold and green and moving in the wind like something alive and breathing. In the time it took Etta Calloway to record her transmission, 41 seconds, most of them were dead. Vasek stood on the bridge of the Carthage and stared at the tactical display. Halcyon's beacon had gone dark. The colony's orbital infrastructure, the defense grid, the communications relay, the atmospheric processing stations that had spent 30 years making the air breathable for human lungs, all of it was gone, destroyed with a precision that the tactical analysts would later describe as surgical, a word that felt obscene when applied to the murder of millions. What remained, according to the long-range scans that trickled in over the next hours, was a world with a new geography. Impact craters where cities had been. Glass where forests had stood, not metaphorical glass but actual vitrified silicate. The soil and stone and root systems fused into smooth, reflective surfaces by temperatures that nothing on the planet had been built to withstand. An atmosphere choked with particulate matter that would take decades to settle. The copper sunsets that Pell had loved were gone, replaced by a permanent gray haze that turned the light the color of old concrete. She did not cry. She would do that later, alone in a room with the lights off, holding Pell's letter, reading the part about the boy with the flower over and over until the words lost their meaning and became just shapes on a screen. But that was later. Now she picked up the fleet-wide comm and said, "This is Admiral Vasek. All hands to combat stations. This is not a drill." The response from Earth civilian government came 6 hours after the transmission reached UESC headquarters. The General Assembly convened in emergency session, representatives from every nation, every orbital habitat, every off-world settlement, linked by quantum comm arrays that carried their voices without delay, but could not carry the weight of what they were discussing. The debate lasted 9 hours and 47 minutes, and the vote, when it came, was unanimous for the first time in the Assembly's history. The resolution was 4 words long: respond with total force. A diplomat from the Brazilian delegation tried to add an amendment specifying that total force should be defined by military leadership within the bounds of interstellar convention. The amendment was voted down. There was no interstellar convention. There was no precedent. There was nothing in any law or treaty or ethical framework that addressed what to do when an alien civilization you'd spent a decade trying to befriend murdered 2 million of your people for no stated reason. The military chiefs met in a bunker beneath Geneva that had been built during an era when humanity's greatest threats had been other humans. The room was concrete and fluorescent light and stale air, and the lingering smell of coffee that had been brewed too many times from the same grounds. 12 men and women sat around a table that was older than most of their grandparents. Vasek attended via holographic link, her image flickering slightly because the Carthage's projectors needed maintenance she hadn't had time to authorize. General Huang Wei spoke first. He was a compact man with a shaved head and a voice like gravel being walked on. "We don't know the full extent of their capabilities. We don't know their fleet strength. We don't know their defensive infrastructure. What we know is the location of their home system, confirmed by 11 years of signal triangulation and corroborated by 3 independent deep space observatories. And we know they just killed 2.3 million civilians without provocation or warning. What are our options? Asked Director Okonkwo, the civilian liaison. She was a tall woman with reading glasses she didn't need but wore because they made her feel anchored, and she was gripping the edge of the table hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Vasek answered from her holographic perch. We have three. First, we send a diplomatic envoy and request an explanation. We protest. We negotiate. We express outrage through proper channels and hope that the species that just annihilated a colony of farmers is interested in talking. And if they kill the envoy the way they killed the colony, then we've lost an envoy and we're back here having this conversation again, minus time and credibility. Second option, a military strike against their forward positions. We've identified what we believe are 3 staging areas in the outer reaches of their system. We hit them hard, demonstrate capability, and force them to the table from a position of strength. Can we win that engagement? Vasek paused. The pause said more than her words. Honestly, I don't know. Their ships are larger than ours. Their weapons appear to operate on principles we don't fully understand. We'd be engaging a technologically superior force on their home ground. We might bloody them. We might not survive the attempt. Third option. Vasek paused again. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere in the building, a ventilation fan clicked rhythmically, a small mechanical failure that no one had fixed because no one had noticed it until now in the silence. Project Heliophage, she said. The room went quiet, not the quiet of contemplation, the quiet of people who had hoped that word would never be spoken aloud in a meeting with minutes being taken, the quiet of a door opening that everyone had agreed would stay shut. Project Heliophage had been theoretical for 20 years, born in a think tank on Ceres Station, developed in a black site laboratory orbiting Neptune, funded through budget lines that appeared nowhere in any public record. The concept was simple in the way that extinction-level ideas often are, a device capable of inducing a cascading fusion instability in a main sequence star. In plain language, it could kill a sun. Not quickly, not like flipping a switch. The process would take between 8 and 14 days, depending on the star's mass and composition. The device would burrow into the star's photosphere, disrupt the equilibrium between gravitational collapse and fusion pressure, and introduce a feedback loop that the star's own physics would amplify until the process became self-sustaining. Once that threshold was crossed, nothing could stop it. The star would destabilize, swell, and then collapse in a way that was neither supernova nor gentle dimming, but something new, something human engineers had modeled but nature had never produced. Every planet in the system would be sterilized, every moon, every asteroid, every ship in orbit, everything. You're talking about destroying their entire solar system, Okonkwo said. Her voice was flat, clinical, the voice of someone trying very hard to keep emotion out of the equation. Yes. How many Vithri live there? Signal analysis suggests a population between 6 and 9 billion on their primary world, with additional populations on at least 2 other bodies in their system. Total estimated population, 8 to 12 billion. So we'd be killing billions. Yes. The room stayed quiet. General Huang said, they killed 2.3 million of ours, women and children, farmers and teachers and kids in school, without warning, without demand, without declaration of war. They didn't even tell us why. That doesn't justify genocide. Director, they committed genocide first, against a colony of farmers who had been sending them peace messages for a decade. Okonkwo pressed her palms flat against the table. Her reading glasses had slipped down her nose and she didn't push them back up. If we do this, we become something else, something the galaxy will remember, something our grandchildren will have to explain. Vasek's hologram flickered. Director, with respect, they will remember us either way. The question is whether they remember us as the species that protested politely after its children were burned, or the species that made the cost of touching humanity so absolute that no civilization would ever consider it again. There has to be a middle ground. There usually is, but the Vithri didn't choose the middle ground when they came for Halcyon. They chose totality. They didn't damage the colony. They didn't occupy it. They didn't take hostages or make demands. They erased it. Every building, every person, every field of wheat. They chose the most extreme option available to them, and they did it without a word. The debate lasted another 4 hours. Arguments were made about proportionality, about ethics, about the precedent that would be set for every future conflict humanity might face. A philosopher was consulted via link from a university in Kyoto. She spoke for 20 minutes about the ethics of deterrence and concluded by saying, "I can tell you what is right. I cannot tell you what will keep your children alive. Those may not be the same thing." A chaplain was consulted. He prayed silently for 3 minutes and then said, "God help us all," which was not the strategic guidance anyone had been looking for, but which several people later admitted was the most honest thing said in the room that day. A child psychologist was consulted, for reasons that nobody could articulate but everyone felt were necessary. She said, "Children need to know the world is safe. I don't know how to make it safe. That's your job." In the end, they voted. The vote was not unanimous this time. It was close, 7-5, with the 5 dissenting votes coming from people who would spend the rest of their lives wondering if they had been right and hoping they had been wrong. But it carried. Vasek received the authorization at 3:47 hours, ship time. She read it on her personal screen, alone in her quarters, wearing the same slippers she'd been wearing when the world changed. She countersigned it with a thumbprint and a voice confirmation that the computer accepted without comment. Then she forwarded it to Captain Luo Jin aboard the UESC Prometheus, the ship that had been built in secret over 12 years, in a shipyard hidden inside an asteroid in the Kuiper Belt, for exactly this purpose. Luo Jin was 51 years old. She had a face like a hatchet and hands that shook slightly from a nerve condition she refused to treat, because the medication dulled her reflexes. She had served in 3 engagements against pirates in the belt, commanded the escort fleet during the Titan evacuation when a reactor breach threatened the largest moon settlement in the outer system, and once held a bulkhead shut with her bare hands for 4 minutes while her engineering team sealed a breach, an act that had cost her the use of 2 fingers on her left hand and earned her a medal she kept in a drawer and never looked at. When she received the authorization, she was in the Prometheus's galley drinking coffee that had been brewed too strong because the machine's dosing mechanism had been recalibrated by an ensign named Palk, who liked his coffee the way he liked his bourbon, punishing. She read the orders on her handheld while standing at the counter. She did not sit down. She did not sigh or close her eyes or lean against the wall. She read the orders the way she read everything, once completely, with full comprehension. Then she set down the cup, straightened her jacket, and walked to the bridge. "Set course for the Vithri home system," she said. "Best speed." Her navigator, a young woman named Ansari with dark eyes and a habit of tapping her index finger against her console when she was thinking, looked up. "Captain, best speed puts us there in 19 days. Then we arrive in 19 days. Ma'am, should I plot an evasive course to avoid their patrol corridors? Intelligence has mapped at least 4 probable sensor networks between here and their home system." Luojin considered this, not for long. "No. Plot the most direct route." Ansari's finger stopped tapping. "Captain, that takes us through at least 3 probable sensor networks and 1 confirmed patrol zone." "I know. They'll see us coming." "Yes, they will." "Ma'am, is that intentional?" "Yes." There was something in Luo Jin's voice, not anger, not resignation, but a quality of completion, like a key turning in a lock, that made Ansari stop asking questions and start plotting the course. The Prometheus was not a warship in any conventional sense. She carried no torpedo bays, no rail guns, no fighter squadrons. Her hull was thick but not armored, dense composite layering designed for radiation resistance, not combat. Her engines were enormous, 3 fusion drives that could push her to .7C in sustained burn, but her maneuverability was poor. She turned like a continent. She was, in essence, a delivery vehicle, a truck carrying a single piece of cargo. The heliophage device sat in the center of the ship, in a bay that occupied 40% of the vessel's interior volume. It looked like nothing. A matte black cylinder, featureless, the size of a municipal water tank. No lights, no displays, no visible mechanisms. Its surface absorbed light in a way that made it difficult to look at directly, not because it hurt the eyes, but because the brain kept insisting there was nothing there. It sat in its cradle like a held breath, like a word someone hadn't said yet, like the space between a question and an answer that would change everything. The crew of the Prometheus numbered 112. They had been selected over 3 years from a pool of thousands, selected for psychological stability, technical competence, and the ability to do what they were about to do and continue to function during the process. Every one of them had volunteered. Every one of them had been told exactly what the mission was, in explicit detail, with no euphemisms and no softening. Every one of them had been given 72 hours to refuse, no questions asked, no consequences noted. None had refused. Ensign Polk, the one who ruined the coffee, had a sister on Halcyon. Ansari's college roommate had emigrated there 4 years ago. Brennan, the communications officer, had no personal connection to the colony at all, but he'd watched the full transmission 17 times and memorized every word, and when asked why he'd volunteered, he'd said, because she was talking about wheat. She was dying and she wanted someone to know they'd been growing wheat. Someone should answer that. The first 3 days of the journey were quiet. The crew ran diagnostics, checked systems, ate meals that tasted like cardboard and conversation that tasted like ash, and did not talk much about what waited at the end of the road. In the recreation bay, someone had set up a chess board. The game progressed slowly, a move in the morning, a counter-move after dinner, and by the 3rd day it had reached a position that both players recognized as an inevitable checkmate in 12 moves, but neither was willing to execute, as though keeping the game alive meant keeping something else alive too. On the 4th day, they crossed the first HFY sensor network. They knew they'd been detected because the network pinged them, a burst of electromagnetic radiation that washed over the hull like a searchlight sweeping an empty field. The communications officer, Brennan, reported it with the calm of someone announcing weather conditions on a routine patrol. "Sensor contact. They see us, Captain." "Noted," Luo Jin said. "Maintain course and speed." On the 6th day, they encountered their first HFY patrol. The alien ships appeared on long-range sensors as a cluster of contacts moving in a formation that human tactical computers couldn't quite parse. Not a line, not a wedge, not a sphere, but something organic and shifting, like a school of fish responding to a current only they could feel. There were 9 of them. Each was roughly twice the mass of the Prometheus, and their hulls pulsed with a faint bioluminescence that made them look less like ships and more like deep-sea creatures swimming through the dark between stars. Luo Jin ordered the crew to battle stations. Not because she intended to fight. The Prometheus couldn't fight 9 HFY warships and survive any more than a delivery truck could fight 9 tanks, but because she wanted her people sharp, focused, and in their seats. The HFY ships approached to within 50,000 kilometers and then stopped. They held position for 6 hours, surrounding the Prometheus in a loose formation that was clearly meant to be observed. It was a display, a message in geometry: we are here, we are many, we are watching. Then they transmitted. The message was in the HFY's own language, a complex system of layered tonal frequencies that occupied 7 simultaneous audio channels and required 6 hours of computational analysis to decode even approximately. When the translation came through, it was clumsy but clear. Human vessel, you are in sovereign territory. State your function or be removed. Luo Jin read the translation on her screen. She thought about Halcyon. She thought about 2.3 million people who had been growing wheat and watching copper sunsets and falling in love in greenhouses and burying their dead on a hillside with a view. She thought about the word removed. She thought about the 11 years of peace messages that had been met with silence. No response, she said. Maintain course. Captain, Brennan said carefully, they're asking us to identify ourselves. Standard first contact protocol would suggest. They didn't follow standard protocol when they hit Halcyon. Standard protocol assumes both parties are interested in communication. They've had 11 years to communicate. No response. Maintain course. Brennan nodded once and returned to his console. The V3 patrol shadowed them for 2 days. They transmitted the same message 14 more times, each iteration slightly different in tone and complexity. The linguistic analysts aboard noted the progression from what appeared to be formal inquiry to confusion, to something that might have been irritation or concern. A slow dawning that this human vessel was not behaving the way prey was supposed to behave. On the 8th day, the patrol peeled away. They did not fire. They simply turned and left, disappearing back into the dark, leaving the Prometheus alone on its straight-line course toward the heart of their civilization. Luo Jin found this interesting. She mentioned it to her first officer, Commander Diaz, over a meal of reconstituted protein and vitamin paste in the officer's mess. Diaz was a broad-shouldered man from Havana who carried a rosary in his pocket and a harmonica he couldn't play in his footlocker, and he had a habit of chewing thoughtfully even when the food didn't warrant thought. They let us through, she said. Diaz chewed. Maybe they don't see us as a threat. One ship, no visible weapons, no escort. Maybe they think we're diplomats, finally coming to beg. Maybe. Or maybe they're curious. They hit Halcyon and nothing happened for weeks. No retaliation. No fleet massing on their border. Just silence. And now one ship shows up, flying straight through their territory without trying to hide, without responding to hails. They might want to see what we do. That, Luo Jin said, is exactly what worries me. Curious people observe. Curious people wait. Curious people let you get close. You think it's a trap. I think it doesn't matter. We're going where we're going. Whether they let us arrive or try to stop us, the math is the same. On the 12th day, they entered the outer reaches of the V3 home system. The system had been mapped remotely over 11 years of patient observation. 3 gas giants, 4 rocky inner worlds, an asteroid belt dense enough to dim the starlight passing through it. And at the center, a main sequence G-type star designated VTR-7 in human catalogs, but called the Burning Mother by the V3, in a language that tasted of ozone and copper. The V3 homeworld was the 3rd planet from the star, a world slightly larger than Earth with a thicker atmosphere, a surface gravity of 1.2 G, and ammonia seas that shimmered turquoise under the light of a star they had worshipped for 6,000 years. From the outer system, they could see the lights on the night side of the homeworld. Not electric lights. The V3 used bioluminescent technology, engineered organisms that glowed in response to proximity and need, and their cities shone in shifting patterns of blue and green and amber, like living things breathing in the dark. The cities were beautiful, even across millions of kilometers, even on a grainy sensor display, they were beautiful. Ansari, the navigator, stared at the display for a long time, the glow of the alien cities reflected in her dark eyes. It's beautiful, she said quietly. Nobody answered her, nobody disagreed. On the 14th day, the V3 fleet arrived. It was not a patrol, it was an armada. 431 ships, ranging from corvette-sized escorts to capital vessels that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. Massive organic-looking constructs with hulls that rippled like muscle under skin, their bioluminescent surfaces pulsing in synchronized patterns that might have been communication or might have been threat display. They emerged from behind the second gas giant in a formation that was unmistakably military. A layered hemisphere, weapons forward, enclosing the Prometheus the way a hand closes around an insect it hasn't decided whether to crush. Luo Jin stood on the bridge and watched the tactical display fill with red contacts until the screen looked like it was bleeding. She counted them, 431. She did the math. Each V3 ship carried firepower sufficient to glass a small moon. The combined fleet could sterilize a planet in hours. Against the Prometheus, alone, unarmed, with her 3 fusion drives and her single piece of cargo, they were overwhelming. "Well," she said, and something that might have been a smile touched the corner of her mouth. "Now they're paying attention." The V3 transmitted again. This time the message was longer, more complex, layered with tonal harmonics that the translation software struggled to interpret. The team worked through the night. When they finished, Brennan read it aloud on the bridge, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. "Human vessel, you have entered the sovereign core of the V3 collective. You carry no weapons we recognize. You respond to no communication. You approach our world with the trajectory of a missile and the silence of a tomb. We do not understand your purpose. We have removed human settlements before. We will remove them again. We will remove you. State your function or accept dissolution." Luo Jin listened. The bridge hummed with the sound of machines keeping 112 people alive in the vacuum between stars. Then she said, "Open a channel." Brennan's eyebrows rose. "Ma'am." "Open a channel, I'll speak to them." The channel opened. Luo Jin stood in front of the comm array, her hands behind her back, the 2 missing fingers on her left hand hidden by the right, her jaw set at the angle that Diaz privately called the bulkhead face, because it was the same expression she'd worn while holding a ship together with her bare hands. She spoke clearly, and she spoke in English, knowing the V3 would need time to translate and not caring because the words were not just for them. "This is Captain Luo Jin of the United Earth ship Prometheus. 19 days ago, your forces attacked and destroyed the human colony on Kepler 442b, which we called Halcyon. 2.3 million people lived there. Families, children, farmers and engineers and teachers, and a girl who liked copper sunsets and a woman who grew wheat. They had done nothing to you. They had threatened nothing. They had sent you messages of peace for 11 years, and you answered with silence, and then you answered with fire." She paused. The bridge was silent. Every officer at every station had stopped working and was listening. Somewhere deep in the ship, the heliophage sat in its cradle, patient as a stone. "You killed them all, everyone, and you did not explain, you did not warn, you did not declare. You simply came out of the dark and burned them, and then you went home and continued your lives as though nothing had happened, as though they were nothing." Another pause. She could feel the crew watching her. She could feel the weight of the device in the belly of the ship, the weight of the authorization in her pocket, the weight of a decision that had been made by people she would never meet and carried by people who would not survive it. "So now I am here to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully because I will only say it once. Humanity did not come here to negotiate. We did not come here to protest. We did not come here to beg or threaten or posture. We came here to show you what it costs to kill our children." She paused one final time. "You will learn what that cost is very soon." She signaled Brennan to close the channel. Then she turned to her weapons officer, a quiet man named Okafor who had not spoken more than 50 words during the entire voyage, who did his work with the precision of a surgeon and the affect of a stone, and who had a photograph of his mother taped to the underside of his console where only he could see it. HFY, begin deployment sequence. HFY nodded. His hands moved across his console with the practiced ease of repetition. He had run the deployment sequence in simulation 411 times. Deep in the belly of the Prometheus, clamps released. Locks disengaged. The matte black cylinder shifted in its cradle and began its slow journey to the deployment rail. The V3 response was immediate. The armada began to close. 431 ships moved inward simultaneously, tightening the noose, their bioluminescent hulls flaring in patterns that the analysts would later identify as battle signaling. A coordination system based on light rather than radio, faster and harder to jam. "They're charging weapons," Ansari reported. Her voice was steady, but her hands gripped the edge of her console, and her index finger had stopped tapping. "Time to deployment?" Luo Jin asked. 14 minutes, HFY said. "Time to weapons range?" 11 minutes, Ansari said. Luo Jin did the math. She had known the math before they left Earth. She had known it when she plotted the direct course through V3 space. She had known it when she refused to answer their hails. She had in fact been counting on it, on the V3's curiosity, on their arrogance, on their assumption that a single unarmed ship was either a messenger or a fool. She had needed them to wait, to watch, to let her get close enough. "All hands," she said over the ship-wide comm. Her voice carried through every corridor, every compartment, every sealed room where people sat at their stations and knew what was coming. "This is the captain. In approximately 11 minutes, the V3 fleet will open fire on this vessel. We will not survive." She let that settle. She owed them that, the space to hear it and feel it and decide, one more time, that they were where they chose to be. "I want you to know that I am aware of this, and I want you to know that every one of you has performed with extraordinary courage and professionalism. What we carry will deploy automatically upon the destruction of this vessel. The heliophage is designed to function independently once released. It does not require the Prometheus to survive." She took a breath. The bridge was very quiet. "We are the delivery, not the weapon, and we have delivered. What happens after us is not in our hands, but what we did coming here, crossing their space, looking them in the eye, that was ours. That was human, and I am proud to have done it with you." She closed the channel. Ansari wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and returned to her console. Brennan checked his frequencies one last time, as though there might be one final message worth catching. HFY continued his deployment sequence with the meticulous attention of a watchmaker, assembling something that would outlast him. Ensign Polk, in the engine room, placed his hand flat against the reactor housing and felt the hum of the ship through his bones and thought about his sister, who had taught him to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, and who had died on a planet he would never see. Dia stepped close to Luo Jin and said quietly, "For what it's worth, I'd have followed you here even without orders." "I know," she said, "that's why I picked you." He took the rosary from his pocket and held it loosely in his hand, not praying exactly, but holding on. The V3 opened fire at 7 minutes to deployment. The first salvo struck the Prometheus amidships, a focused energy discharge that the human scientists who had studied V3 weapons could only describe as organized plasma. It hit like a fist made of sunlight. The hull buckled. Decks 3 through 7 ceased to exist in a single white flash. 17 people died instantly, including Ensign Polk, who never felt it, whose hand was still on the reactor housing when the world turned to light. Luo Jin was thrown from her feet. She caught herself on the command rail, tasted blood from a split lip, and said, "Deployment status." "Cylinder is on the rail," HFY said from the floor, pulling himself back to his station with his arms because his left leg wasn't working anymore. 2 minutes to launch. The second salvo hit the engines. The 3 great fusion drives, the hearts of the ship, the things that had pushed them across 19 days of void, went dark. The Prometheus began to drift, spinning slowly, trailing atmosphere and debris and frozen vapor from a wound that ran the length of her starboard side. She was dying. She had been dying since she left Earth, in a sense, but now she was dying in the literal and immediate way that ships die, breaking apart at the seams, losing air and heat and light. "Auxiliary power," Luo Jin ordered. "Auxiliary is holding," Diaz reported, blood running from a cut above his eye. "Deployment rail is on a separate power bus. Hardened system, it's still functioning." "Then nothing else matters." A third salvo. The bridge lost gravity. Consoles sparked and died in showers of blue-white light. Emergency lighting came on, red and dim, the color of blood seen through closed eyelids, the color of a world ending. 60 seconds to deployment, Akafor said. He was strapped into his chair now, working his console from muscle memory because the display had gone dark and his eyes were closed, and it didn't matter because his hands knew the way. "They're firing again," Ansari said, though nobody could see the tactical display anymore. She was reading the vibrations through the deck plating, feeling the ship shudder as each salvo hit, counting the impacts the way a doctor counts heartbeats. Luo Jin closed her eyes. She thought about Etta Calloway's voice, calm and clear, talking about wheat while the world burned around her. She thought about a copper sky at sunset. She thought about Pell, not her Pell, Vasik's Pell, but all the Pells, all the children who had looked up at an alien sky and called it home. She thought about wheat fields burning. She thought about the chess game in the recreation bay, frozen mid-play, about to be scattered by fire. She thought about Polk's pancakes and Diaz's harmonica, and Brennan's memorized words and Akafor's mother's photograph. "Deploy," she said. The heliophage launched, not with a roar or a flash, but with a mechanical thunk, the sound of a lock releasing, a cradle opening, a thing being set free. The matte black cylinder slid from the belly of the dying Prometheus and tumbled into space, unremarkable, invisible against the dark, already activating, already beginning the process it had been built for, already reaching toward the star with the patience of something that had all the time in the universe. 4 seconds later, the fourth salvo hit the Prometheus's reactor. The ship died in a bloom of white light that was, for a brief moment, the brightest thing in the system. All 112 crew died with it. Captain Luo Jin, Commander Diaz with his rosary and his harmonica, Navigator Ansari with her tapping finger, Communications Officer Brennan with his memorized words, Weapons Officer Akafor with his mother's photograph. All of them gone, scattered across a volume of space that would never be visited again. The V3 fleet watched the wreckage expand in a sphere of gas and metal and frozen atmosphere. They scanned the debris thoroughly, methodically, with the precision of a species that had mastered the art of destruction. They found nothing of strategic interest, no weapons, no warheads, no fusion devices. Just the remains of a ship and its crew. Just humans broken and dispersed, floating in the dark. They did not find the heliophage. It was already gone, falling toward their star at a velocity that made it indistinguishable from a piece of debris, its surface absorbing sensor radiation like a hole in the universe, like a shadow falling across a face. The V3 fleet held position for 2 days, scanning, analyzing, debating. Then they dispersed. The threat, they concluded, had been neutralized. The human ship had been a gesture, defiant, perhaps, but empty. A single vessel with no weapons, crewed by 100 frightened mammals who had flown to their deaths for reasons that the V3 behavioral analysts could not satisfactorily explain. They were wrong, but they would not understand how wrong for another 6 days. The first sign that something was amiss came on the 6th day, after the Prometheus's destruction. V3 astronomers on the homeworld noticed an anomaly in their star's spectral output. A slight dimming in the hydrogen alpha line, followed by an irregular pulsation that did not match any known stellar behavior. It was subtle, the kind of thing that would normally merit a footnote in a journal, a topic for a graduate seminar. But the timing made it conspicuous, and the astronomers were already on edge. And so a paper was published, and a committee was formed, and data was gathered. On the 8th day, the anomaly became visible to the naked eye. The burning mother, the star that had warmed the Vithrai homeworld for 6,000 years of recorded history, the star that featured in their creation myths and their lullabies, and the patterns of light they wove into their architecture, flickered. It dimmed, brightened, dimmed again, in a rhythm that was too regular to be natural and too slow to be anything the Vithrai had ever seen. Stars do not flicker. This was one of the first things Vithrai children learned in school. Stars burn steadily for billions of years. They are the one constant in a universe of change. This star was flickering. Panic began slowly, the way it always does. First among the scientists, who understood the implications of what they were seeing even if they couldn't explain the mechanism. Then among the military, who had destroyed the human ship and were now reviewing the wreckage data with increasing unease, looking for something, anything they had missed. Then among the government, who received classified briefings and emerged from them pale and silent and unwilling to make eye contact. Then among the people. On the 10th day, the star swelled. It grew by 8% in diameter in 6 hours, its surface roiling with convection patterns that looked like continents forming and dissolving in an ocean of fire. The temperature on the homeworld rose by 4 degrees. Ice caps that had been stable for millennia began to weep rivers into valleys that had been dry since before the Vithrai discovered mathematics. The ammonia seas began to steam. The Vithrai collective transmitted to Earth for the first time in their history as a species. The message was simple, stripped of the formal layering and hierarchical tonal structures that characterized their language. It was raw, desperate, almost human in its directness. What have you done? Earth's response was drafted by a committee of diplomats, military officers, linguists, and one retired philosopher who had been pulled out of her garden in Kyoto for the occasion. It was approved by the General Assembly in a vote that was, once again, not unanimous. It was transmitted in mathematical notation, in Vithrai tonal language, and in English. It said, "On the 14th day of the 3rd month of this year, your forces destroyed the human colony of Halcyon without provocation, killing 2,300,000 civilians, including children, farmers, teachers, and a girl who liked copper sunsets. We transmitted messages of peace for 11 years. You answered with silence and then with fire. You destroyed our children, our homes, our wheat fields, and you did not explain why. Now you know what it costs. The process you are observing in your star is irreversible. It was initiated by a device deployed from the vessel you destroyed. The irony of this is not lost on us. Your star will destabilize completely within 4 days. We recommend evacuation, though we are aware that your interstellar capabilities may not permit the evacuation of your full population in that time frame. This message serves as both explanation and warning, not to you, but to every civilization that will ever detect our signal. Humanity does not start wars, but we end them, completely." The Vithrai transmitted 47 more messages over the next 4 days. The tonal analysts who decoded them described a progression that followed the contours of grief, fury first, hot and formless, then disbelief, then bargaining, then something cold and vast that the human language didn't have an exact word for. A combination of horror and grudging recognition. The sound of a predator realizing it had mistaken a nuclear reactor for a campfire. The sound of a species understanding, too late, that they had been wrong about something fundamental. Some of the messages were threats. We will find your homeworld. We will burn your cities. We will make you remember us in pain. Some were pleas. Stop this. Reverse this. Name your terms. One message, transmitted on the 12th day, offered the complete surrender of the Vithrai military and the transfer of all territorial claims to human authority, in exchange for the survival of their star. Earth did not respond. There was nothing to respond with. The process was irreversible. That was not a negotiating position. It was physics. The final Vithrai transmission came in the last hours before their star's collapse made electromagnetic communication impossible. It was a single phrase, transmitted on all frequencies, stripped of all formal structure, barely a whisper in the static. The linguists debated the translation for months afterward, and the best they could agree on was this: "You are more than we calculated." The Vithrai star collapsed on the 14th day after the heliophage deployment. It did not go supernova. It did something worse, something the human physicists had predicted but hoped would look different in practice than it did in the models. The star folded inward, swallowing its own light, pulling its planets from their orbits like beads sliding off a broken string. The homeworld was consumed, its bioluminescent cities, its ammonia seas, its 6,000 years of history and art and worship. The gas giants were consumed. The asteroid belt scattered and then spiraled inward. The moons fell like tears. In the space of 47 hours, the Vithrai home system ceased to exist. Not destroyed in the spectacular, photogenic way that supernovas destroy, no expanding shell of gas, no visible remnant, no nebula that future civilizations would name and admire. Just absence. A place where something had been and now nothing was. Not all Vithrai died. Those on distant outposts, on colony ships, on military patrols far from home, perhaps 100 million survived, scattered across a volume of space that suddenly had no center, no homeworld, no burning mother. Refugees of a species that had once commanded fear from every civilization within 100 light years, reduced to wanderers with nowhere to return to. They never attacked a human settlement again. Nobody did. The aftermath was not triumphant. There were no parades on Earth, no celebrations, no speeches about victory. The General Assembly convened again, and this time the silence lasted longer than any debate had. They sat in their seats and looked at their hands and thought about what their hands had authorized. They had done what they had voted to do, and now they lived with it, and living with it turned out to be harder than doing it. Admiral Vasic retired 6 months later. She moved to a small coastal village in Portugal, a place with whitewashed walls and terracotta roofs, and the sound of the Atlantic in every room. She spent her days walking on the beach, collecting sea glass in her pockets, and her nights looking at the sky through a telescope that was much too expensive for birdwatching, which was what she told her neighbors she used it for. She looked at the place where the Vithrai star had been. She looked at the dark where millions had lived and loved and looked up at their own sky and thought their own thoughts. There was nothing there now, just dark. She kept Pell's letter in a waterproof case in her coat pocket, the letter about the boy with the flower, about the copper sky, about the Szymborska poem that had made her cry. She read it every morning with her coffee, and every morning she made a choice about whether the thing they had done was justified, and every morning she arrived at a different answer, and every morning she got up anyway and made coffee and fed the seagulls and watched the light move across the water and continued to exist because that was what humans did. They continued, whether they deserved to or not. A memorial was built on Luna. Not a monument. Humanity had learned to distrust monuments, the way they calcified grief into something decorative and manageable. Instead, they built a garden, an enclosed biosphere, 1 kilometer in diameter, pressurized and heated and lit by artificial sunlight calibrated to match the spectrum of Halcyon's copper sky. Inside, they planted the same species of wheat that had been grown on the colony, grain developed over decades of careful breeding, adapted to alien soil, strong and golden, and able to grow in conditions that would have killed its ancestors. The wheat grew in the weak lunar gravity, tall and swaying in air currents generated by machines that hummed like sleeping things. It grew thick and heavy-headed, bending under its own weight, catching the artificial light and turning it the color of old honey. At the center of the garden stood a single stone, unpolished, uncarved, bearing no inscription. People who visited understood without being told. The stone was a headstone for everyone and no one. The wheat was the only eulogy that mattered. The crew of the Prometheus were honored posthumously. Their names were recorded on a plaque set into the wall of the garden, simple and clean, 112 names in alphabetical order with no ranks and no decorations, because in the end they had all done the same thing and rank seemed irrelevant. Captain Luo Jin's entry included a personal note she had left in her quarters, found in the data backup transmitted to the Carthage before the Prometheus entered V3 space. The note said, "I don't want to be remembered as the woman who killed a star. I want to be remembered as the woman who made sure no one would ever have to do it again. But I know I won't get to choose." She was right, she didn't get to choose. History remembered her as both. Commander Diaz's family received a box containing his personal effects, a rosary worn smooth by decades of handling, a photograph of his mother standing in the doorway of her house in Havana with bougainvillea climbing the wall behind her, and the harmonica he couldn't play but carried everywhere because his father had given it to him, and his father was dead and objects outlast people, and that is both the tragedy and the gift. His mother hung the photograph of herself next to a picture of the Sacred Heart, and did not distinguish between the two in her prayers, and did not explain this to anyone, because it didn't need explaining. Navigator Ansari's partner planted a tree in their backyard in Shiraz. An almond tree, because Ansari had once said, on a summer night with the windows open and the smell of jasmine in the air, that almond blossoms smelled like the first day of a life you hadn't started yet. The tree grew slowly, the way important things do. It was still growing years later, and every spring it bloomed white and fragrant, and Ansari's partner sat beneath it with a cup of tea and talked to someone who wasn't there and was answered by the wind. Across the galaxy the story spread. Not quickly, interstellar communication was slow, and many civilizations received the information years or decades after the event, like light from a star that had already died. But it spread, and it changed things. The Korvathi, a species of traders who had been considering expansion into human-adjacent space, quietly redirected their trade routes to maintain a respectful distance. The Ilindari, who had been intercepting human probes for study, returned every single one with apologetic notes attached in 17 languages, several of which humanity couldn't translate. The Mendoth Communion, which had never heard of humanity before, added a new entry to their encyclopedia of known species. The entry was brief. Humans, bipedal mammals, emotionally complex, highly social, technologically adaptive, do not provoke. The Geth Conclave, a civilization old enough to remember when the galaxy was young, sent a single message to Earth. It arrived years after the event, carried by a probe that was itself older than human civilization. The message, once decoded, read, "We have watched species rise and fall for longer than your sun has burned. In that time, we have seen empires built on cruelty and empires built on kindness and empires built on fear. We have never seen a species that contained all three in such precise and terrible proportion. We will leave you alone. We suggest others do the same." There were those who condemned what humanity had done. Some alien civilizations broadcast formal censures, diplomatic notes of outrage addressed to no one in particular and everyone in general. Others simply added humanity to their lists of dangerous species, lists that also included solar parasites, sentient plague vectors, and creatures that lived in the hearts of dying stars. Humanity's inclusion on these lists was not flattering, but it was effective. And there were those, human and alien alike, who understood that what had happened was not about strength or cruelty or the mathematics of deterrence. It was about something simpler and more terrible than any of those things. It was about wheat. About a woman named Etta Calloway who had spent her last 41 seconds alive talking about wheat, because that was what mattered to her. Not weapons, not politics, not territory, not the alien ships darkening her sky. Wheat, the growing of food, the feeding of people. The irreducible human act of putting a seed in the ground and believing, against all evidence, against all reason, against the vast indifferent cruelty of a universe that does not care whether you live or die, that something would grow. The Vithri had burned the wheat, and humanity had responded with the only language the universe truly understands: consequence. Not revenge. Revenge is personal, petty, satisfying in the moment and hollow after. What humanity did was not satisfying. It was not personal. It was not hollow. It was the cold, mathematical, grief-stricken expression of a principle that every parent knows in their bones and every empire learns at its cost. You do not touch our children. You do not touch our children, and you do not burn our wheat, and you do not come out of the dark and destroy what we have built and then go home and sleep peacefully in your beautiful glowing cities by your ammonia seas. Because we will cross your space in a ship with no weapons, and we will look at your beautiful cities and your glowing seas and your 6,000 years of civilization, and we will be sorry, genuinely sorry. And then we will kill your sun and watch it fall, and we will go home, and we will not sleep peacefully either, but we will sleep knowing that it will never happen again. And that is enough, and it will have to be enough, because nothing else is on offer. The universe is vast and old and indifferent. It does not care about wheat or children or copper sunsets. It does not notice when a star dies or a species falls or a garden grows on the moon. But humanity notices. Humanity always notices. That is both its gift and its curse: the inability to look away, the refusal to forget, the stubborn, irrational, magnificent insistence on remembering every beautiful thing that was lost and making the universe pay for it. And that is why, in the quiet dark between the stars, where civilizations rise and fall like breath on a cold morning, the word human became something more than a name. It became a warning. Years after the Vithri star fell, a survey ship from an uncontacted species entered the region of space where the Vithri home system had been. They found nothing: no planets, no debris, no radiation signature consistent with natural stellar death. Just absence. A void where something had been, cold and silent and total, like a word erased from a page. They scanned the void for 3 days. Their instruments found nothing to scan. The absence was so complete that it seemed intentional, as though someone had reached into the fabric of space and carefully, precisely, removed a single thread. Then their captain, a being of silicon and light who had commanded survey missions for longer than human civilization had existed, made a notation in the ship's log. The notation, translated roughly, read: "Here something was, now nothing is. The local species, the ones called humans, did this. Their reasons are recorded in their own transmissions. They lost a settlement of farmers, 2 million dead. They responded by removing a star. This is disproportionate by any rational calculation. No mathematical model of deterrence justifies the expenditure. No game theory framework predicts this outcome. And yet, as I sit here in the dark where a star once burned, I find that I do not wish to meet these humans. Not because I fear their weapons, though their weapons are formidable, but because I do not wish to learn what else they love enough to unmake the sky for. Recommend: adjust all survey routes to maintain minimum distance from human-claimed space, not as a strategic measure, as a courtesy. Some things deserve a wide berth. Some grief demands a certain respect. And some species, I think, are better understood from a distance, where their warmth and their fury blur together and look, from far enough away, like starlight." The survey ship adjusted its course and moved on, leaving the void behind. In the void, where the Vithri star had been, there was nothing but dark and dust and the faintest trace of something that might have been starlight, if starlight could grieve. On Luna in the garden, the wheat grew tall. It bent in the artificial wind, golden and heavy, catching the copper-tinted light like small fires burning close to the ground. People walked among the stalks and touched them and were quiet. And on a beach in Portugal, an old woman with tired eyes and sea glass in her pockets read a letter about a copper sky, and fed the seagulls, and did not forgive herself, and did not regret, and watched the tide come in the way it always had and always would, patient and relentless and utterly, stubbornly, beautifully human.